So thank you everyone for joining this evening for our online event hosted by the BGA Early Careers Group. So this is our sort of mock interview session for those of you that have completed your IPD successfully with the Institution of Civil Engineers, but you're now preparing for your final interview. So this is hopefully going to be some useful guidance and will provide some hints and tips for how you might be able to sit your interview day successfully. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you saw it before when you all arrived. Pretty common practice now for Teams meetings, but we are recording. So you know, any views or opinions expressed, we do have representatives here to hopefully keep us on the straight and narrow, but you know, they are not reflective of organisations. They are kind of opinions as well. Please keep muted when the presenters are speaking. We are open to Q&A. This is, you know, hopefully going to be a bit of a interactive session. So if you've ever got any questions, please just put them in the chat box. We've got Kieran on hand, who I'll introduce shortly, who can answer lots of questions, as well as our other interviewers and interviewees. So if you've got any questions as we go along, please chuck them in the box, but also we've got some time at the end for an open floor Q&A also. Yeah. So the kind of plan of action for today, introductions by myself and the summary of the event. We'll then go straight into a presentation by two current ICE reviewers. We'll then have a mock interview and a Q&A associated with that. We'll also have a candidate experience summary and a short chat by Kieran Tully, our Membership Development Officer from the ICE, about what makes an engaged engineer, and then, yes, the Q&A at the end. So great. Okay, I think we're good to go. If Hitesh and Lizzie, are you ready to talk?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so feel free to just tell me to next slide, please. As we go through.
Yeah, well, we'll start off here. So I'm Hitesh Mistry. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineers. I think the one thing I really want to get across in this is just that reviewers are also normal people, and actually to kind of whatever we talk about today, Lizzie and I are normal people. You know, when you go for your review, it's not like some kind of interrogation or whatever, and I'll talk about a bit about that a bit later. But you know, we are just normal people. And what Lizzie and I will do, we'll do a bit of a tag team as we go through. So this is kind of, we'll go through the different points and just share a bit about each other. So, and what our experience has been as reviewers.
Yep.
Lizzie, do you want to?
Yeah, I think from my point of view as well, just remember we've actually been where you are. So, I mean, you'll notice that I'm incorporated, so I'm still on my journey as well. So yeah, I became a reviewer because I wanted to give back so I could help other people through the process, because I actually found it quite terrifying. So yeah, just remember, you know, we've been where you are, and like Hitesh says, we are also normal people. We're here to help you through the review.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to go to the next slide? So the aim of the meeting is to share our feedback, our thoughts from the other side of the table. You know, just like Lizzie said, we've been through the process. We've seen it from both sides now. So hopefully the sort of tips and things that we share with you can really help you on your journey, and just you know, provide you with, you know, that hopefully a bit of extra confidence for when you do go for it, and actually feel like you're ready to go. The different routes to membership, you know, there are different routes to membership, but the things we're going to focus on here are sort of related to the professional review part, as in you provide a report, you go in, you go for an interview, you do a presentation, and then you know, you get questioned on that and sort of marked with the different attributes and that kind of thing. So that's the sort of the bit that we're going to be talking about today. And I think the heart of it all, I think all reviewers, I'd say this, every single person, every single other reviewer that I have met, and before the sort of the pandemic, when we were, you know, used to do reviews in person, used to get to meet other people, used to normally meet the night before and catch up at a sort of reviewers briefing. you know, we all want you to pass, actually. You know, we're not looking for sort of cracks to exploit or looking for that thing to sort of, you know, try and make you fail. That really isn't the heart of it. Because we've all been there, we do all want you to pass, and want you to sort of go through. So you just remember that actually, when you go into that process, or when you start you know, going for your making your application, we do want to see you get through. So yeah.
Yeah, I suppose just to add to that as well, quite often one of the things, like what we'll do before we start the review, is we will agree a number of areas that we want to explore. So we'll obviously hit every attribute whilst we're going through the review, but there might be some things that haven't necessarily come out in your report beforehand that we want to just explore a little more, which might be why we ask more sustainability questions. Or we might keep asking a question but rewording it, and it might be that we think that you've not answered the question. So it's always okay to turn around and say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what exactly you're asking here. Could you reframe the question for me? And if you're at the limits of your competency, quite often we're just asking you to, in a roundabout way, to say, that's outside of my realm of responsibility, but here's what I'd do to get that information. So always bear that in mind as well.
Cool. And just touching back on what I said earlier, we are normal people as well. You know, Liz and I have a day job. We both work on HS2. I've got a family with 4 kids. You know, we have a genuine day job. We've devoted our time to, you know, help people through it, and we'll touch on that at the end. But, you know, just dispel this myth that, you know, that you're going into some kind of, I don't know, interrogation or whatever it is. It is, you know, we are normal people. We eat breakfast just like you. We go to sleep just like you. You know, just sort of just break that kind of image in your head of what a reviewer might be, or what it is. And, you know, if you treat it just like a client meeting, you know, you're going to go and see, you know, someone that you're already working for or with, and you're talking about an issue, you're talking about a particular subject. If you treat it like that, then you know, you'll be absolutely fine. And I put this point in here, number 6. It's not the end of the world if you fail. Hold my hands up. I failed my review the first time I sat it. So I've been through the process. I did feel absolutely gutted. I did feel like, where's my career going to go? What am I going to do next? You know, you do think, you know, what are the next steps? And I know with Mott McDonald's, you know, there is a little bit of a you can't progress on to the next grade until you've got chartered, you know, so there is a little bit of that, and that does add a bit of pressure into it, and especially when you've devoted so much time and effort into preparing for it, and everything else, and then to sort of get the wrong result at the end of it, you know, it's disheartening. I'm not, you know, I know that firsthand, but just remember, you know, talk to people, talk to your DE, talk to your SCE. It isn't the end of the world. You know, it is just one thing, but you will get over it. And just, you know, look at what the feedback is, pick it up, and then, you know, and then try again. You know, please do try again.
Yeah, I think use it as a learning experience as well. So I've been through every membership of that I can. So I started as an engineering technician, and then I did my incorporated, and now I'm moving through to chartership. And I gained a lot from doing that process. That worked really well for me. That won't necessarily work well for everybody. But yeah, it is all about, for me, I went in there for my engineering technician review thinking this is just learning. If I don't pass, then I can learn from it, and I can go back, I can still put my application in again in 6, 8, 12 months. So also bear that in mind as you're going through the process. What do you want to actually get out of it? And for me, I wanted to understand the process and get some feedback in terms of where I was performance-wise, which I managed to achieve. So
cool. Emily, do you want to get to the next slide?
Yeah.
So we've sort of broken it down to different sections. The first bit is preparation. And the first thing, do look at the most recent guidance published by the ICE. It has changed, particularly from last year to this year. The number of attributes that you're measured against has gone from 9 to 7. The communication task has also changed. So make sure, you know, as you're coming up to it, look at the recent guidance, make sure you understand the dates, make sure you understand what you're going to need to do, what you need to prepare, the word count, all those sorts of things. Just in terms of sponsors as well, I mean, it's now gone down from 3 to 2, but check when the sponsors need to put in their forms. It's now, you have to do it before you make your application. So, you know, do check, it does change. Make sure you've got the latest information. Oh, I've got a bit of a story on this. I did, when I went for it, and the time that I passed, when I passed it, I assumed that normally the application window used to be the first week of January, straight after Christmas, and I thought, right, okay, well, I can make my application and I'll be fine. And then I went and had a look, and it was actually, well, it was actually earlier than I thought it was, and I had like 2 or 3 days to suddenly put all my stuff together to make my application, because I hadn't, you know, I just assumed I knew what the process was because A, I'd done it before, and B, I'd looked at it a little bit earlier, but they had changed, so do check on it. And so either you don't miss your window, or you end up, you know, with a lot of stuff to do in a short amount of time. Do plan out how you'll demonstrate your attributes. So think about the 3 facets that you're going to use to demonstrate that you're a, you know, you're a chartered civil engineer. So one of them is your report. So obviously you got that in there, and that's, you know, a lot of word count. There's 5,000 words in there. You got your presentation, and also the communication task. So if you think that the communication task and the presentation and the report, that covers the attribute 7 in terms of the communication elements of it. But don't just repeat things in your presentation that you've already covered in your report. You know, we've already read that. You know, you can use your presentation to cover more of the attributes in depth, to basically show that you are that chartered engineer. So please don't repeat it. Use, you know, maybe you want to focus on, say, 5 of the attributes in your report, and just touch on a couple of them in the report, but then go into more depth in the presentation to really demonstrate it. So, you know, use all the different elements of it to be able to show that, to show who that you are, you know, ready to be made a chartered member of the Institute of Civil Engineers.
I think as well, just to build on that as well, one of the things I learned from doing some mocks, which I know Hitesh is going to move on to in a minute, was I got some feedback from one of my sponsors who reflected on my report and said that they didn't think I'd necessarily hit one of the attributes with enough strength. And I then focused my presentation around making sure that I addressed that gap. So it meant that I was questioned on that a little bit less in my review, because I'd managed to cover all of my attributes equally. So bear that in mind as well, making sure you do get peer reviews of your submissions, because you can use that presentation to emphasise anything that you feel you might have missed, or not necessarily demonstrated as strongly as you would have liked in your report submission as well.
Cool. And also ask reviewers or other chartered engineers within your organisation, or people that you know, to give you a mock review. It may sound simple, but also ask them to be honest. I reviewed someone. There was someone that I was asked to review, and he'd already gone through a practice review with a couple of engineers, and then he came to me and said, and someone else to do a review, and he went through, and this was only a few weeks before his actual review, and I came out of that and I said to him, you know, if you'd have presented that in actual review, I would have failed you. You know, on these, I gave him some, you know, quite honest feedback on it, but he hadn't had that from the previous people that he'd had the mock with. And, you know, do get them to be honest, because actually you do want the process to be worthwhile. You do want them to think, you know, anything that you are slightly short on, whatever else, you know, make sure that they point it out. You know, tell them to tell you the truth of what they think. So, you know, almost go in with that caveat to say, look, I want you to be honest. I want you to tell me the truth, and to kind of, you know, because you've got then time to actually make the changes or make amends to the presentation or whatever else that you need to do in order to sort of get you through. So please do ask them to be honest as well. Do write in the first person and in the past tense. So tell us what you did. So I did this, I managed, I led, I changed the design, I wrote a early warning notice, I We want to know what you have done. We don't want to know about what other people have done. And then there may be instances where you've had to then, get some input from someone else to say, that's more senior and do that, and that's fine. You can say that. But ultimately, it's your report. We want you to demonstrate that you have met those different attributes. So we want you to tell us what you've done. It's also, I've seen when you're working on a project, at the moment, and you're writing about it, and you can say you're writing the present tense because that is the current report. But actually, you can kind of get a bit mixed up with that. So just write in the past tense, say I did this, because actually, if you think about it, in order to have met those attributes, you must have done the work, even though that project is current. So do write in the past tense. Tell us what you've actually done. Some of the general context types things, about the project, just to say what it is, that's useful, but just keep it brief. It just helps to know some of the sort of the basic things about it and what your role is. But do keep that brief, but focus on the things that you have done.
Yeah, I think just on that as well, that's something that I do tend to slip up on a lot, because we're in such a collaborative working environment. I mean, Hitesh and I are on an IPT, which is an integrated project team. So a lot of the stuff we do, in our heads, we do it collectively, we do it as a team. So one of the recommendations that I would give is go through your report and just search for we. Because a lot of the time you'll write we naturally, as though you're talking about what you and the team did, even though you may have led it or you may have been directly responsible for it. Make sure that you change that and it comes across well in your report. The other thing that I got somebody who wasn't in the industry, so one of my friends read through my report, because she could then easily pick those things up and say, oh, did you mean to put we're here, or did you mean I? Because she's outside of the environment. So that's a recommendation that I would give as well, to make sure that you're focusing purely on what you have done. And if you led the team, right, I led the team. And Hitesh will laugh because he picked up on that from one of my reports. But yeah, it is about you. We want to hear what you did and what you contributed. So just make sure that you focus in on that.
It does feel a bit unnatural, because you're almost like, you're trying to sell yourself, but you're trying to demonstrate that this is what you've done. It does just feel a bit weird like that, especially when you write a technical report as well. That tends to be very factual and almost fairly scientific, but then you're then going to a thing where you are trying to almost you're trying to show what you've done, and the style is slightly odd, but you do need to do that because we want to know and see what you've actually done. Emily, do you want to go to the next one? So yeah, focus on addressing the attributes, and as that is what the reviewers will assess you on. So you've got the different, there's a form, the 3050 or 3051 form, I can't remember what the form is. There's a form that we fill in to basically, as part of the audit trails, and once you've done your review, what we need to write in that. I was trying to actually get the new form. I had one from the last time, but I was trying to show you actually what do we fill in as a reviewer. That is, the record to show that you are, you passed your review and what have you. What is the feedback on it? And basically, what it is a series of boxes with all the different attributes in there, and we have to provide evidence that you have satisfied that attribute. So if you direct your report and your presentation in that regard and target those different attributes, it helps us in terms of being able to, to show that you have satisfied them. But it also just helps you to target your word count, because 5,000 words can go pretty quickly. So if you just sort of focus in, right, this one's going to be on the technical aspects of it. I'm going to focus on the technical attribute on these. The next one's going to be on commercial aspects of it. Then the next one's going to be on sustainability. You can be targeted with your text. And I've said this to a lot of the graduates that I've helped, is a chartered engineer. Right? It's almost like anyone can be an engineer. We're all good at sort of trying to fix things or make things, to a lesser or better degree. But a chartered engineer will design and build things cheaper. There'll be a cost benefit or for coming to a chartered engineer, be able to do things quicker, as in there's a program saving on there, be able to do things more safely because of in terms of health and safety, to be able to do things more sustainably. And that's the thing that you need to draw out in what you're trying to show in your different in your report and your presentation. Number 2, I'll just repeat again, tell us what you did. Not interested in the general fluff. And I've got another story. I was doing this was a mock review, thankfully, so there was time to sort of change it round. But out of the 15 minutes, about 7 minutes of it was just about how they were, really pleased to be on the project, and the general stuff about the project. And you've wasted nearly half of your time, half of your presentation, on stuff that doesn't demonstrate any of your attributes. And you can just pile that down to sort of almost 10 things. I worked on HS2. I'm a design manager in this area. I look after this section, and I'm going to tell you about what I've done here. And that's it. You just move on to the next bit. So focus on the things that you do. And, the general things help for context, but just keep it brief. Present your own work, not someone else's. This may sound obvious. I was in a review that I did a couple of years ago now, and somebody had managed the design and they had not done the design, and then they were essentially presenting someone else's design. It quickly unraveled. So make sure you present what you have done, your design, your work, and not someone else's. So, just if I suppose in one way, if you're managing a design, as in that is the attribute you're focusing on, fair enough. But if you're then using it to demonstrate a technical attribute, well then, someone else has actually done design and you haven't. So, just be aware of that. Do use pictures, tables, and as Lizzie mentioned earlier, ask your DE and your SEE, your mentor, to review the report. The thing you'll find is the first couple that you go to kind of do the review, and they'll pick out things, and then you get to a point where it's pretty much there. And then when you then go to other people to look at it, then it's sort of expressing opinion. They may think, based on their experience, that you should focus on you should strengthen one attribute, whereas someone else may say you focus on another one. So there you just got to make a decision to say, actually, I'm fine with that because it is your report. You kind of said, I've satisfied everything. I'm fine with it. I've had lots of people look at it. Let's issue it and sort of and wait for the day kind of thing. Do you make sure your calcs are checked and assured, as in, all the boxes that, it's a little bit of a, I do look to check and see, you haven't just, that actually followed a process, whether you're a graduate in an organisation, you've done something, make sure it's got, a check in it. I think it just shows that you followed the different processes and procedures that are sort of in-house. Any sort of computer modelling, you see all these beautiful pictures with lots of different colours on it, and moment force diagrams and all these sorts of things that come out of different computer models and what have you. But do make sure you can explain it. Computer programs are stupid in, stupid out. You put in silly answers, you'll get a silly answer at the other end. And one of the things I do ask is, how do you know it's right? So when you're have you done some hand calcs on it? Have you done a sensitivity analysis on it? How can you show that there's actually the answers that you're getting are reasonable, and you can then use it, for the rest of the design? So do make sure you can explain it, because otherwise it just looks like lots of colourful pictures in a report. Practice your presentation until it becomes second nature. You will feel nervous. You put a lot of time and effort into it, as I mentioned earlier. You're then coming into the day. If you practice it and you know that you can time it to sort of 15 minutes, and it almost becomes second nature, so it almost overrides the nerves. And if you've done it and you practice it, you've rehearsed it, so when you come up today, even though you're feeling nervous, you're able to just deliver it. Actually, that's quite a big tick in the box. You feel confident. Look, I've done that well, and it becomes second nature, and you can kind of then move on to the rest of the sort of the questions and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it really does come across between candidates that have really prepared their presentation, because they do, like Hitesh says, they have that air of confidence. We know that the candidate speaking to us really understands their topic, whereas when somebody hasn't practiced their presentation quite so much, they tend to reduce eye contact, they're looking at their screen or their notes, and it's much more enjoyable for us to listen to if the candidate's passionate and comfortable with what they're discussing. So definitely practice it, and practice it. I used to actually, it's going to sound silly, but practice mine in front of a mirror to make sure that I was making eye contact, but also practice it with people in mocks, for example, so that you're used to presenting to people as well. If you know you're going to have a virtual review, try and do your mock review over Teams so that you get used to that environment. Whereas if you know you're going to have a face-to-face, I'd encourage you to do it face-to-face, just because it sets you a little bit more into your comfort zone when you go into that review for the real thing.
Cool. The last one I'll just put there, your reviewers will do research. Google works for reviewers as well. There'll be stuff you do get matched to a reviewer. There'll be a sort of a lead reviewer that is matched to sort of your experience, and there'll be another one that is the cross reviewer, which is, you know, just a general one. And you know, there'll be stuff there that I won't have been used to, others won't have been used to. We look it up, you know, we learn, we want to know more. So certain things, you know, do spend time looking at it, and so, you know, just be prepared that we will have come prepared as well. We do prepare for them, we do talk to each other, and work things through, ready for it. So there's certain things, if you kind of just be aware that, you know, we will have read around your topic and subject if we don't know about it. So yeah, and if there's any sort of papers and that kind of thing that you mentioned, I do look them up. I'll just have a quick read of them. Some of them might be way over my head, but I do actually look them up. And so quite often we just, you know, we do look at them and just to see there. So, you know, if you do put those things in, just be aware that we will have had a look. Next slide. So just to focus on what happens on the day, do dress smart. So make an effort. You know, the Institution of Civil Engineers has got a long history, you know, and, you know, we're sort of proud of it and what it represents. So just, you know, it just shows you're taking it seriously. Hands up. Lizzie seen me in meetings on Zoom. I do have a hooded top. You know, maybe you know, I have been into client meetings and stuff where, you know, you're there, but you've built a rapport with the team, you know them, and that kind of thing. But, you know, just make an effort, you know, treat it if it's important to you. You know, the reviews see it as an important thing as well. So just you know, do dress up. The reviews will be in smart business attire. That's the thing that we're told to do as part of it. So, you know, your reviews will be you know, dressed up as we go.
I think as well, wear something that you are comfortable in as well. If you do go to HQ to have your review, the floors are quite slippery, so wear sensible footwear. But it is all about those first impressions. So yeah, like Hitesh says, just make sure you dress smartly. If you are doing a virtual review, by all means wear jeans or jogging bottoms, but just make sure from the top up that you are smartly dressed.
We do try and help you to settle in. So, you know, when there will be a bit of small talk, you know, previously when it was in person, it'd be, you know, how's your journey? Was everything all right? You know, or, you know, online, it's just, you know, there'll be some kind of thing just to at least try and help you make comfortable. As I said right at the beginning, you know, we are normal people. So, you know, we do want you to feel comfortable. We do want you to feel at home. I put this one, number 3, and I was talking to Deryck about it afterwards. And I hadn't realised, Deryck, that I actually put it in there. We do watch, you know, we look at what you're looking at, and sometimes you do sort of see, you know, post-it notes. I've seen this in actual interviews, you know, when you're interviewing people for a job and that kind of thing. And one of the standard questions we got is, you know, what do you know about Mark McDonald? And there'll be a thing that they'll reel off, and you can see their eyes looking to one side of the screen. And so, you know, post-it notes around the screen, you know, they are obvious. You do notice it. I do need to ask the institution what are their thoughts on it, because you know, they do get you to look around and is there anyone else in the room, that kind of thing, and show where you are. But you know, some of those sorts of things that aren't quite as obvious. You know, just be aware of that, really. The way that the way that the format works, generally the questions on the presentation are the sort of the starting point, because you've just done it. The reviewers will then focus on that and come off that. You know, it's quite an obvious place to start that. But what you may find is that questions can change abruptly, and you'll kind of see this in the interview that we do with Deryck coming up in a few minutes. Is that we read the report, you know, Deryck and you have written the report, you know, you've done the presentation, you delivered it to us, so actually it's familiar to us as the reviewers and as the you know, as you going in for your review, so we can see. So there may be a bit of chopping and changing because we're trying to get to you know, to make sure you satisfied each attribute. When you're watching, you may not be familiar, so it may just think a bit, so it may just seem a little bit clunky or a little bit like abrupt. But I know that when Deryck talks about his, he will may just give a little bit of context when he's responding to stuff. But just be aware that things can change fairly quickly on that. And the other sort of clunky nature of it is when you're sat next to each other, you can pick on your cues, you can kind of see the body language. So, you know, as I said earlier, that the reviewers do talk beforehand, you know, a number of times to sort of work it through, and they'll kind of work out how they're going to go from question to question. But on an online thing, it can seem a little bit clunky because you kind of think one stops, the other one hasn't started yet, and then the other one starts, and it just a little bit. But then that's just the, you know, the dynamics of a sort of online review process now. And the final thing on this one, use pen and paper if needed. You know, if you're not sure, you're trying to explain something, you know, draw a sketch and put it on the screen, you know, and just show it. You know, I'm not very good at using paint. In fact, I'm terrible at using paint, and it just can be a bit, you know, much better using a pen and paper. So if that's the same for you as well, do use that and do that.
I think as well, just to add to point 3 in terms of where the reviewers watching where you're looking, don't focus too much on where we're looking, because for a lot of your review we will be looking down or to the side, and that's because we're making notes as you're talking, and as you give us more information we're jotting that down so we can fill in our forms afterwards. So don't be put off by that. It's actually a good thing if we're taking notes, because it means you're telling us what we want to hear. So other people are very good at scribing while still looking at the screen, so also don't be put off if your reviewers seem to be staring at you the entire time. So yeah, don't focus on what we're doing, and it's very much about you just focus on what you want to get across.
Cool. Last, I think there's just one more slide. Sorry, we've overrun a bit. Do you want to go to the next slide, Emily?
Changed. Oh, there we go.
Oh yeah, there we go. Got it. Liz, you mentioned this at the beginning. Do become a DE, SCE, mentor, reviewer. Invest in the next young engineers. You know, just as others have invested in you. You know, it does take time. You know, for us, we want to see more and more people come through. You know, we want to pass on the baton to you guys. You know, once you've done it, you know, we want to see more engineers. We all value the profession. We value what you do. You know, hopefully we love our jobs, and we want to see new people inspired by it. So, you know, don't just think, right, I'm chartered, I'm done with it. You know, look around. You know, pick up the next graduate that's joined. You know, there's normally an annual intake with a lot of the big companies. You know, invest in them. You know, share what you've learned with others, and I really want to recommend that. I had that with me. I had someone that took me under his wing when I was, you know, when I was a graduate, and I've seen that through. And there's other people as well, you know, within different organisations that you get to know with the work that you do, and they'll be able to support you as well. So I think that's
Great.
what we've got at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you both. I think that's a really good start for our session. So without further ado, let's thank you. Let's move on to our mock interview for this evening. So Deryck has kindly Oh, you're requesting control. Let me allow you have that. That's probably better. Yep. So Deryck will give his presentation. This is the one that he actually did use when he sat his chartership day. So we'll have the full presentation, so sort of 15 minutes ish, so you can get a flavour of the level of detail that's required, and then there'll be shortened questions, probably about 10 minutes or so. So yeah, Deryck, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Deryck. I currently work for Mott MacDonald as a geotechnical engineer, specializing in reservoir geotechnics, hence my background picture. I became a chartered engineer last year, but about 2 years ago, I was a research engineer at Cambridge University doing my doctorate, studying this phenomenon of basement movements. And that is the project I'm going to present to you in the next 15 minutes or so. I shall tell you how to design an underground station using a time machine. So where this project began, I seem to have gone through a few slides in one go. My apologies. Let me try to go back. Yep. Where this project began was from a site visit to Crossrail back in 2016. We're now 6 years down and still hoping the railway will open this year. This is Blomfield Box at Crossrail Liverpool Street. And on this site, one intriguing discussion occurred. It was a debate between the principal contractor and the principal designer on how much steel and concrete would be required to make this basement withstand the movements that we expect between the clay around the basement and the basement itself after the basement has been built. So you think, wait, what? Haven't we been building basements in London for over 200 years? Surely that problem is solved. In a way it is, but in a way it also isn't. And let me take you through the basics of this problem. You see, fundamentally, the Earth is a giant sponge. So if you dig a big hole in the ground, what happens is that whatever's remaining in the ground will want to swell after you've removed your basement space from the top of it. I seem to have lost my slide again. Sorry.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay with when you press next slide.
I see. Emily, can I go? Yeah, go back one to the three infographics. Yeah. So whatever's left behind will want to swell and bounce back like a spring. In many geological strata, it just happens instantaneously, but in other places, like stiff clays, for example, London, it could take something like 20 years to occur in real life. And so if you're an engineer and you want to build something safely, there is a tendency to be conservative so that you can sleep well. And that's why this problem remains to be researched as of the 2010s. Emily, maybe I should let you advance to the one with the design method.
Okay. There we go. The delay.
Yeah. So the reason conservatism used to work and still works is that if you think of it as a spring problem, then if you make your new basement as heavy as the soil that you've taken away, then you've gotten rid of the problem, solved. And over the last few decades, engineers from various projects in London came together and found that if you assume that the new basement would need to take 50 to 65% of the original overburden in terms of upward swelling load in the long term, that would be a good estimate. Any better than that in terms of a prediction, we need to account for the interaction between the soil and the structure after you build it. And one common method of doing it is to use this thing called relaxation ratio method. If you're a tunneling engineer, you might have known this same thing as the compression confinement method. Essentially, you've got movement on one axis, some measure of pressure on the other axis. You plot a set of curves representing your structure and another set of curves representing your soil, and where they intersect is your first estimate of movement and pressure after construction. the thing is, whatever you do, even if you go to an advanced finite element method, you need some physical data to calibrate the method and verify it. The point is, if this phenomenon takes 20 years to happen in real life, what can you do? Well, the obvious solution, at least in my head, is to use a time machine. Well, as it turns out, for civil engineering phenomena, we have a time machine, and it's called a geotechnical centrifuge. Fundamentally, a lot of phenomena in civil engineering depend on time because they depend on gravity. And so if you can change gravity, then you can change the rate at which time passes. So in my experiments, I ran a 1 in 100 reduced scale model of my basement and the soil around it at 100 times Earth's gravity. That will give me a result that is equivalent to the real life phenomenon, but it happens 10,000 times faster, which means for every hour of my lab simulation, I get about 1 year of equivalent real life phenomena. And this is a cross section of my experimental model. I've got the equivalent of 16 meters of over consolidated clay on the bottom and about 15 meters of dry sand on top and a basement buried inside it. At the start of the experiment, the basement is filled with a liquid that's the same density as the sand around it. That liquid is drained out during the experiment to simulate an excavation, and then an actuator applies a load on top to simulate the construction of a new building. And throughout this time, the movements of the clay, the basement, and the pore pressures inside the clay are measured, and also the contact pressures between the basement and the soil around it. And the preparation of this set of experiments isn't too dissimilar from a construction site. I was in charge of managing the construction and operation of my experiment, and I was in charge of the project management and the health and safety and welfare of my colleagues. So for example, when we were preparing the clay sample and the sand samples, I need to take care of the dust risks in the laboratory. And when the experiment was being assembled into a centrifuge, I needed to ensure that all lifting protocols are followed, and that anyone who needs to go into this centrifuge, which is in an underground pit, are using the correct posture and climbing in and out safely, for example. And so to complement the experiment, I also performed a series of finite element simulations. I used a small strain hardening model to represent a clay and a more Coulomb model to represent a sand. And on this chart, I'm showing the excess pore pressure just after an excavation, and I was able to match the results from a simulation with my experimental data to validate the results of the simulation so that we can use it to inform other aspects of my research. Overall, I did 8 centrifuge tests and performed finite element simulations to match each of them, and also compared the results with site data from a site in London. Between the different experiments, I varied the flexibility of the basement box with a very thin basement, as you can see in the middle of the slide, and a typically stiff basement represent the equivalent of a 1 meter thick reinforced concrete slab on the bottom right of the slide. I varied the oversight load to simulate the effects of different kinds of buildings being put on top of a basement. And I also varied the embedment conditions between the bottom of the basement and the clay around it. And so let me take you to some of the main findings of my research. Well, earlier on, I was talking about this interaction diagram between heave movements and the pressure that remains on the basement box in the long term. And I said, over the years, engineers have come together and came up with this rule of thumb that if you expect 50 to 60% of the original overburden that you've taken away to manifest itself as upward pushing force underneath your basement after you've built your basement, then that would be a pretty good prediction. And my experimental and numerical data seems to say, yes, that is correct. If you build a typically stiff basement, you will get a typical heave load of about 60% of the original overburden that you've taken away. but not if you let the slab move. Because there's a soil interaction and structural interaction problem, if you build a very flexible basement instead, we're just doing it hypothetically to understand a phenomenon, you can get nearly complete relaxation of the soil load, but at the expense of allowing a lot of movement. So what can we do with this understanding of basement behavior? Well, first, we want to optimize our designs by breaking out of self-fulfilling prophecies. Because of these rules of thumb that have produced safe designs for many decades, many designers of basements have got into a loop of self-fulfilling prophecy where we use historical data to predict the loads on our basements, and we then use those loads to design our structure. But in the case of soil structure interaction for a basement, it is these designs of heavy structures, the stiffness of the structure itself, that attracts the large loads that you've predicted, completing your self-fulfilling prophecy. If we want to get better than typical, then we should adopt a serviceability approach where we start by deciding how much movement is acceptable, and then use an interaction method like the one I presented just now to estimate the residual load on your structure and the movement you should expect, and use those parameters to design your structure, and then verify that your newly designed structure can handle the predicted movements and loads, which will give you a leaner basement than what you have predicted using the old self-fulfilling rules of thumb. Quantitatively, using my experimental and numerical data, we could also refine the relaxation ratio method. So traditionally, it's assumed that the contact pressure between the base slab of a basement and the soil underneath it is uniform, just to give a first prediction. My data seem to show that you can get less conservative, but still accurate and appropriately safe predictions by switching to a parabolic assumption of soil structure contact pressure. And using the numerical and experimental data that I've got, I was also able to produce a dimensionless plot of heave pressure versus a non-dimensionalized measure of the basement stiffness relative to the stiffness of the soil. And if one is now designing a new basement in a new site, this can be used as a preliminary guide of what stiffness will be required to give you what kind of heave load to expect after you finish building a structure. So that is a whistle-stop tour of my research on basement heave. To sum up, I performed 8 centrifuge tests of this phenomenon and performed finite element simulations to match each of them. In my role as a researcher, I had the project management duties to manage my colleagues' time, the resources and program of my project, and the health and safety of my colleagues and the laboratory operations. The work that I've done helps to contribute to sustainability by improving predictions of the interaction phenomenon so that we can design leaner basements when the opportunity arises. And like this presentation I'm giving today, I'm taking the opportunity to present the new and ongoing good practices I've learned from our research in various industry events, so we can spread the word to more geotechnical practitioners. So that's it from me. Thank you for the opportunity to let me speak, and we'll move on to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Deryck. It was a great presentation. So I'll take us back right to the beginning and just tell us, how does a soil become over-consolidated?
Yeah, so it's in the name, isn't it? Over-consolidated means that at some point in the past, or so we think, the soil was compressed by something that is very heavy, and then that load was removed to give us where we are, but the soil has some memory of what it has experienced in the past. So in the natural environment, well, we can only guess backwards from what we see today. But for example, for the over-consolidated clays of Great Britain, they are usually created because of historical glaciation or other natural deposits on top of the soil that were subsequently eroded away by later geological processes, leaving behind what we've got today.
Wonderful, thank you. And what happens with the water in the soil during that process?
Yeah, so in soil mechanics, we often model soil as we usually model soil as granular material with pore fluid of air and water. And so if you start from soil with a lot of water and then that gets compressed, that water will need to escape. And equivalently, if it's buried in the ground and you take the load off and the soil wants to swell, then it will need to absorb air and water. And that is why we have this phenomenon of long-term heave, where the soil takes years to finish absorbing that water and air to increase in volume. Yeah.
Okay, so looking at the structure in the soil, you talked about doing basement designs.
Yeah.
So what are the differences between designing a structure in, let's say, over-consolidated and normally consolidated soils, clays?
I would say the philosophy is the same. We want to design a structure for both the temporary and the permanent case so that it can be safely built and safely inhabited. And we want to consider the relevant interactions between our structure and the soil around it. What differs is that normally consolidated clay tends to be quite soft and a little bit more permeable than over consolidated clay, which is quite stiff and tends to swell. And so if you are building, if you're switching between the two scenarios, you might need to use different excavation methods to suit the stiffness of the clay you encounter. You will need to provide different amounts of temporary support to enable safe construction of your structure, and you need to provide a permanent structure of different weights and stiffnesses to match the ground conditions.
Okay, so in overall summary there, so your I've lost my question, lost my train of thought. So for normally consolidated versus over consolidated soils, which would you think would be more expensive? Build if you had to build the same sort of basement.
It could be either. I must say I'm not an expert in the estimation. If this question was posed to me, I need to ask colleagues who have wider experience in doing commercial management of both types of basements. But I would say more so than over consolidated versus normally consolidated, the congestion around the site where you're building is more likely to dictate the cost compared to the differences between the kind of soil. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just going to take you over to your report now.
Yeah.
So in the report, you talk about the use of hydrodemolition, which is something that does pique my interest a little bit. So why did you determine initially that hydrodemolition was the best demolition method over using traditional demolition methods?
Yeah, so for the benefit of our viewers today, earlier on in my career, I undertook a project where I led a mock build of a complex, large precast structure for the purpose of building big power plants, and in that research, my role was to investigate the different precast construction methods and how we can optimize it. So if we think about precast construction, we put precast concrete products together and stick them together using in situ joints involving more cement. So if we are able to use a method like hydrodemolition to break the bits of concrete back apart in deconstruction stage so that we can recover the precast components and for a future project, then we can have significant sustainability advantages by reducing the amount of concrete that needs to be crushed and then recast and the carbon footprint that's associated with it, and that was the premise of that project. Yeah.
Great. So, staying on the subject of hybrid demolition, what are some of the health and safety issues arising from the use of the process? Because obviously we're using high pressure jets to actually conduct the demolition, and how did you plan to mitigate against them?
Yeah, so well, the overarching answer is things fly around. The jet of water could hurt people if not done correctly. The flying fragments of concrete that were being demolished could hurt people if not handled properly. In fact, the person holding the hydro demolition hose could fly away if they aren't grounded properly. So a demolition plan was needed, where exclusion zones need to be created to ensure that no high pressure water or flying fragments of the building being demolished could fly out and hurt someone. Physical barriers are in place. All staff needed to be properly trained and equipped and wearing appropriate PPE to mitigate a risk of flying fragments, and where they stand need to be carefully marked out so that you remove the risk of the operative being blown away by the jet itself. Yeah, so that's the health and safety part of it. There's also an environmental aspect of risk, whereby because we're demolishing something that has concrete in it, the concrete dust would be carried away by the jet of water that's being used to demolish the structure, and so the effluent in the case of my project was controlled by collecting it into a sedimentation pond, so that the water could be pre-processed before being discharged into a watercourse safely without polluting the environment.
Okay, so just now moving on for the work that you did on Maiden Lane Service Reservoir. Yep. So you mentioned there that the client increased your team's design scope. So can you just tell us about what form of contract it was?
Yeah, so there was there still is a framework contract between my company, Mark McDonald, and the client, Thames Water, and the project forms part of that framework. And in the original scope of my involvement as a designer, the contract form was a lump sum contract. And in the additional work that we were granted, because we were moving from concept design to detail design and then to construction stage, the form of contract switched to time and materials in the new scope. Yeah, which was quite interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so for the lump sum, who carries the risk of that form of contract, or risk of change?
So for the lump sum, my team as the designers carried the risk for the contract because we agreed on a scope of what to deliver, and we will have to deliver it. Whatever happens, and we'll get paid the same amount of money. The advantage to taking that risk is that if we were able to innovate during the project and deliver the same design outcomes with less resources, then we also pocket a profit.
Yeah. And why did you move from a lump sum to a sort of a remeasured contract for the second part, or for the new scope?
Yeah, because in the new scope, it was becoming clear to both the client's commercial manager and my company's commercial managers that, well, and to me as a designer, that as we move on to construction stage, more and more the work will be driven by incidental findings on site. And so moving to a remeasurement contract allows us to adjust the scope of work as events happen without having to renegotiate the scope and payment method of the whole contract while these changes occur, and that would be helpful for the project's operation. Yeah.
Okay, so just now looking ahead, so assuming you pass your chartered professional review, so where do you see yourself in sort of 5 years' time? So what are your career ambitions?
Yeah, in 5 years' time, I think I hope to be a leader in my field of work within civil engineering, so that I can train and equip a younger generation of engineers to pass on these interesting work and good practices that we've found out over the years. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Deryck.
You're welcome.
That's that's a sort of a very quick highlight of it, and we've just gone through some some quick questions here. We've tried to sort of condense it into sort of 10-15 minutes, but if you kind of get the theme of what we've been doing, there is a lot of movement between different questions. There's obviously a rapport that we have between the reviewers who we've tried to sort of plan where we go with the questions. That you will start off with a presentation, move on to the report and that kind of thing. What we do try to do is start off with some gentle questions just to sort of get you into it. And then again, sort of the closing bit, again, look for something a little bit more, just to sort of land you gently back down again as you sort of come to the end of the review as well. So just kind of, we do try and structure it in a way that is, just helps to get the best out of you.
Great. Okay. Thank you both for that, all of you. That was really, really useful. So let's move on to to our next recently chartered professional. So Marko won't give his full presentation because we've sort of had a taste of the content that you would be including. But we asked Marko to sort of give a highlight presentation that he did give on the day. And then it'd be nice to do some questions as well for Marko, but also get a bit of a general kind of candidate experience summary of the day, and yeah, get a bit of an insight that way. So Marko, if you're good to go.
Yep, sure.
Great. Just changing the slide now. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I think there's a little bit of a delay. There we go. If you want to request control.
Okay, yeah, that's just come up for me. Yeah, okay, so I'll try and keep this to about sort of 5 minutes. This is basically a condensed version of my actual report. I don't think it's going to be as exciting as Deryck's. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of a run-of-the-mill project. So yeah, Churchlands Catton, my name's Marko. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yep.
Might be a bit slow. The contents of this project presentation, I'll give you a quick scheme overview, and then I'll go through some of the value engineering. Next slide.
Yep.
Sorry, this lags a bit.
I know, it's very laggy.
Comedy act. So the project itself, Churchlands Catton, it was quite a large earthwork remediation scheme on the sort of network rail framework. Essentially, the remit was to basically fix the geotechnical asset and prevent future failure. So I was part of Tony G. Our direct client was Murphy's, who was the principal contractor, and the end client was Network Rail. We employed Crouch Waterfall for various Cat 3 check packages. My role within the scheme, I was the project engineer sitting just below the project director internally. A few of the responsibilities just to list off that I got involved with was leading meetings, managing client expectations, pricing additional works. Next slide, please. So when it comes up, on the left there is the Form 1 design, which is basically the approval in principle, single option, and on the right, I'm hoping it comes up soon. And on the right is the AFC design, which is the approved for construction design, final design that got built. Through these value engineering, we did 4 optimizations, as shown with that timeline, and there it appeared. I'll go through those 4 main optimizations now. Through that as well, 2 ECRs were set up and managed to undertake those optimizations. Next slide, please. when it comes up. So optimization 1 was all to do with the saw nail design, which was above the portal. Through optimizations in the ground model and geotechnical parameters and the saw nail design itself, we managed to widen the grid spacing from Form 1, reduce the nail length, and also design out the need for way leave, which is nails going underneath or past network rail boundary. Next slide, please. So optimization 2, I'll just talk while it comes up.
I'm so sorry, this is so slow.
You'll have to use your imagination for optimization 2. So this was all to do with the lower slope geometry. On the left, you can see the Form 1 design, and on the right, you can see the Form 3. Really, the whole aim of this whole segment was to increase the toe weighting of the proposed design. By doing, basically, we moved the proposed toe close to the railway. We also steepened the lower slope and increased the height of the berm. Like I say, increasing the toe weighting actually increased the global stability of the slope, and thus also reduced the cut volumes by about 9,000 meter cubed. However, it wasn't all good news, because we did essentially steepen up and make less stable the proposed lower slope. So we deepened the shear trenches in that area and increased the number of them to offset that. Next slide, please. Optimization 3 was all about the wall alignment. On the left, you can see the Form 1 design again, basically 15-meter long contiguous piles with anchors, and on the right is the Form 3 design, which was actually longer piles, 60 meters long, but without anchors. The main driver for this whole optimization phase was the anchors was adding, I think, 32 weeks onto the construction program, very costly, a lot of sort of wet concrete involved. So essentially, we almost came back to optioneering stage at that point. I produced a load of technical notes, went to a few value engineering workshops to essentially discuss moving this wall, the implications of it, even removing the wall completely. We actually proposed an option. We arrived at a new option to move the wall back 4 meters, which obviously reduced the retained height. And it removed the need for anchors. However, it did increase the rebar and increase the length of the piles, so it did offset there. Optimization 4. So this was similar to optimization 3, but it's all to do with we then got told that the gravel track could not be purchased, which was basically at crest line between 42 chain and 44 chain. I then again went to value engineering workshops with contractor and client, essentially explained to them, if we move the wall any closer, we're going to reintroduce the need for anchors. Obviously, that was a big no-no in terms of cost. So we basically looked to change the geometry of the regrade in front of the wall. So above the level platform, it was a 1 in 4. We steepened that up to 1 in 3, which then managed to make us basically kink the wall towards railway and keep the same retained height, or similar retained height. Actually reduced it. In that, we managed to reduce the pile lengths, reduce the rebar, reduce the cut volumes, but it did introduce some fill volumes in the middle of the slope. Basically, that's why we had a 1 in 4 before. We're cutting underneath the existing profile, but now we went above it and introduced fill. Next slide, please. So just to wrap all of those up, we did a RSSB carbon calculation on the Form 1 design and the AFC design, and this was the exact slide I did actually, and it said 30% less embodied carbon. We've since refined that actually, and it's 35%, but yeah, there was some embodied carbon savings with all those changes, and I think that was it. Hopefully that wasn't too rushed, and it was a bit
So do you want to talk about the experience that you had on the day, and then maybe we can do 1 or 2 kind of questions that you would have typically got asked for that presentation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've just jotted down a few notes. I mean, on the day, I think it's changed now, so it was back in November 2020, I think, actually, going back a bit. But I got invited to the Microsoft Teams call, joined the Teams call. Initially, there's like 3 people in there, 2 reviewers and the IC representative. You know, you show your ID, prove it's you. Then the IC lady sort of stepped out. Then, a bit contrary to what Hitesh was saying, it was sort of very much at that point like, okay, crack on. I was like, okay. But they were friendly, to be fair, at the end. But yeah, it was sort of like, here's your, have you got your presentation? Yeah, okay, go. And I sort of did that, obviously uninterrupted for 15 minutes, 45 minutes worth of questioning. Generally, it was touched on earlier, sort of 40% of it, I'd say, was on the presentation, 40% of it was to do with the report that they've already got. And then 20% was sort of about yourself, similar. I think I got that exact same question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Obviously, a good answer from Deryck. They're not asking, married with 2 kids sort of thing, so yeah. And then after that, they sort of said, thank you very much. And I think that's when you get to realize, like Hitesh says, they are just humans. Like you have a little bit of a chat at the end. I left the Teams call, joined another Teams call a bit later, and then that was when I did the answer 1 or 2 questions. I think it's changed, so but yeah. And then just wait for 6 to 8 weeks, really. So yeah, that was really the process. I've got a few top tips. I think it's going to really echo what's just been said. I did write these down before I heard everything else, I promise, but it sounds like it was very similar advice. I'd say one thing, I spoke about 2 projects in my report. I actually got advised against doing that, and I sort of went against that advice. I found that 5,000 word limit went quickly. I'd recommend just refining it to 1. I really struggled to keep it down to 5,000 words. There's, you never quite know how much you've got to speak about for one project until you get going, and you're like, oh, there's loads. So yeah, the other one, I'm not the best wordsmith, to be honest, in report writing, but quite a lot of advice I got was sort of actually use the attribute titles in some of the work. So it's sort of like, as I think was mentioned earlier, it really just like keynotes it. It's like, oh, he's talking about commercial there, or you use it red flags it. It's quite a good way of doing it. I did a mock review before. The mock is always harder, I would say. In a way, I did the mock with 2 people from my same company. They almost know the Tony G system, or whoever company, the systems that you work to already, so they can delve into it quite deep. Whereas maybe the reviewers don't quite, every company has slightly different systems. So the mock, in a way, they can extract more information or delve a bit deeper potentially. So yeah, it's always a bit harder, I'd say. So don't get too disheartened, I'd say. I know this was mentioned before, practice the presentation. When I stepped out of the mock review, when I got feedback, that was the first thing they said, practice your presentation. I don't know if that was a subtle hint, that wasn't very good, but but it was very much, you want, when they say, start your presentation, you want that 15 minutes to go and finish, and then it's like, oh, questions, because it is uninterrupted, they cannot influence it really. So, that's, rehearse it, do it out loud in front of a mirror, I think was said. I think I did, I had it all planned out in my head and thought I knew what I was doing. And then when I did my first presentation in front of my girlfriend, sort of got a minute in and shut the laptop. I was like, this isn't working. So doing it out loud, I think, is where you figure out if it's coming together or not. So yeah, practice it. You just want it to be plug and play. Sort of similar to what's been said as well, only putting your presentation in your report stuff that you want to be questioned on. I always think of it like, say if you've done some nice finite element, modeling or something like that. I didn't, but let's say you did. And then suddenly the reviewer's like, the founder of Plaxis or something, you'd probably be, you just think about, do you want to unlock that door and let them in, or do you maybe, because you've got the license to put whatever you want in the report. Obviously they see that before you've even sat down for your interview or on the day, so they can sort of, Google or whatever. So, do you want to get questioned on it, yes or no? If it's yes, then maybe. And sort of the other side of that, say if you're really good at soil nail designs, let's say, maybe put a slide in it and then hope that they do ask the question, then you can shine that this is what soil nail does. So yeah, that sort of mentality is probably a good one, I would suggest. Yeah, the 9 attributes, I actually got it described to me exactly as Hitesh mentioned it, of like having 9 boxes. Obviously the number of attributes sustains that has changed, but you have 9 boxes, and where I sort of said was, they have a different color pen for the review, the report, the presentation, the interview. So if your report's quite heavy on commercial, they'll probably be writing in their blue pen for the report, loads in the commercial box, and then maybe in the interview and presentation, that you're going to be targeted on the technical maybe. So yeah, it's just filling up all of the boxes. They're trying to extract the information out of you. I've had times in my interview where there'd be 4 or 5 questions in the same string, and then it would be like on the 5th question I'd say 1 word, and then they'll be like, you see them both nod, and they're sort of like, yeah, go on to the next question, sort of thing. Like, so they're trying to extract it. They're not sort of like, oh, he gave the wrong answer, question number 1, that's him, game over, sort of thing. They they're not trying to fail you. I would very much echo that. They're trying to extract the information. It's there somewhere, I think. Well, hopefully, obviously. Big one for me, understand your QMS and EMS systems at your company, your quality management, environmental management systems. Does your company have any accreditations? If they do, know them. Why do they have them? Processes to ensure quality, design reviews, this and that. Could list a million things there, but just know your systems. Obviously, you do it day to day, but just like if someone says, how do you ensure quality in your deliverables? List it off. CDM is obviously a big one, mandatory one as well. So hazard triangles on drawings, identifying it. Stuff that a competent contractor wouldn't already know, stuff like that. So that sort of stuff, I think, is key. Health and safety is obviously a big one. Cost, quality, time triangle. I think if you understand that and the philosophy behind that, well, you can almost build it into quite a lot of what you say. Obviously, just the underlying thing, you can't compromise on safety with all of that. You can cut costs, cut quality potentially, but it still needs to be safe bottom line. So don't get tripped up of, I think I had a question in my interview, something like, oh, cut quality, is that going to be unsafe? They're sort of, obviously there's an obvious way to answer that one. So again, just think about health and safety. I think I had another question where it was very much, the safety critical staff on site. He was sort of asking, oh, if you're behind on time, would that guy, the safety critical staff, pick up a spade and help you dig? Obviously, I said no. His job role is to keep us safe, but they're just feeding it because I think health and safety is obviously one of those where if you don't pass that, you don't pass anything. So for obvious reasons, it's a big one. Contracts awareness, again, I mean, my contracts knowledge wasn't that high, I would say, going into the interview. They're not looking for an expert in everything. Know your limits. I think there was a question in Deryck's review where he sort of almost said that he'd asked for help. That is a legitimate answer. You don't need to know everything. I think there was a contracts question of something along the lines of, if you were using this contract, what would you do? I'd never used it. I'd just say, I'd seek help from the commercial directors. But some cursory awareness you'd need to know. And yeah, don't worry after. I sort of left my review thinking I failed, to be honest. I'd say after you've done it, just don't worry too much. It's happened. You can't change it. And, if you pass, you pass. If you fail, you fail. It's not the end of the world. I think as well, being on Microsoft Teams, you sort of like, you'd have 10 questions. If 9 of them went well and 1 of them went bad, you'd remember the bad one, you'd forget about all the good ones. And that was very much for me. Like, I got sort of quite brutally questioned on one question, and that's the only thing I could remember. But obviously it went okay because I passed. But you know, the day after, I remember having like a chat with my boss about project work, and he was like, I was a bit grumpy with him. But yeah, don't worry about it. You know, it's not the end of the world. And you know, it's probably gone better than what you think, I'd say. But yeah, I think that's me. Hopefully that wasn't too waffly.
That was really useful. For someone that has not yet sat their chartership interview, that was really useful. Thank you for that, and thank you for doing your shortened presentation as well. So I'm going to move on finally, before we do a wider Q&A, to Kieran, if you're still on the line. So we don't have any. Oh, good. You're hanging in there, which is great. So we don't have any slides, which, you know, it's fine. We don't need them. But I just wanted Kieran to have an opportunity to say a few words about sort of what is, you know, an engaged engineer. But yeah, I'll pass over to you anyway.
Okay, thank you, Emily. So a little brief introduction. So I'm a membership development officer, and I started with the ICE last year, and membership development officers are part of the membership recruitment team, and we help students, graduates, apprentices and members grow professionally. So that's students to graduates, graduates to members, and members to fellows, for example. So I'm an experienced engineer, chartered engineer. I have a background in ground engineering. I used to work for Cementation Skanska, hence my interest in the early careers group and all things geotechnical. I then moved to join Heathrow Express, a train operating company, delivering projects at Heathrow Airport and Paddington Station. I then moved to Syria to lead a programme of good practice guidance for civil engineering infrastructure and process and technology. In my role as a MDO, Membership Development Officer, I monitor company training schemes. I sign off training completions at IEng and CEng level, conduct local membership surgeries. So these are, you know, one-to-one sessions for non-standard issues, and assess career appraisals. So that's a little bit of background. And I thought I would talk for a few minutes about the communication task, because there is guidance available on the ICE website. It is a change from the written exercise, and those who are familiar with the communication task will see that the focus has changed from writing as a technical expert to writing as an engaged engineer. So I thought it would be useful just to talk about that. So you can find the guidance on the ICE website. If you just enter communication task in the search bar, you will find it. So this task forms part of the assessment of attribute 6, which is interpersonal skills and communication. And as I said, you will be expected to respond as an engaged civil engineer, not as a technical expert, but the definition of engaged civil engineer is not defined. So let's look at that first. What is an engaged civil engineer? So as Emily said at the start, this is my view. You can challenge it, but it's not in the guidance. This is my view of how to interpret what an engaged civil engineer is. So my view is it is someone who's able to look outside their immediate sphere of work at the other industry themes, and these are listed in the guidance as scenarios. It's someone who understands the why. Why, as an engaged civil engineer, are these themes important? And think about how these themes impact your day-to-day role, your organisation, industry sector, and importantly, society today. So in trying to get a better insight into these scenarios, there are useful sources of information available via the ICE website, such as the News and Insights tabs, blogs, and of course there is the New Civil Engineer magazine, which should help with your understanding of current issues, which is referenced in the guidance. So an engaged engineer is somebody who, in my view, is looking at the News and Insights on the ICE website, reads the New Civil Engineer, maybe the Ground Engineering magazine as well, and industry reports, not all of them, but the important ones like the ICE State of the Nation report. So they're good sources of information. So to go on, there will be 2 questions which will be made up of a scenario and a response format, and you'll have to answer one. So I'm sure you've heard this before, but please read the question carefully, understand what the reviewers are looking for, read all parts of the question and make sure you answer the question. You've got 90 minutes for the task. Decide which question you are going to answer, spend around 15 minutes planning what you want to say, about an hour writing the piece, and allow about 15 minutes for checking at the end, because you will be assessed against good use of English. Practice under time conditions, have a beginning, a middle and an end. So you will be assessed against knowledge and relevance, good use of English, clarity and presentation. And the scenarios are listed in the guidance, and they also include the presidential themes from 2020 and 2021. So that'll be Rachel Skinner and Ed McCann. It's worth noting that if you look at the professional review guidance, you are allowed 2 sides of A4 reference material for the task. So that's not 2 pages, but 2 sides of A4 reference material. And the response formats are listed in the guidance. There will be 2 response formats, 1 for each scenario, and as well as the scenario, you have to consider your audience. So the response formats are 1, an industry supplement, so that's likely to be a broad interest group, so that could be very similar to something like the new civil engineer. Civil engineering students, so these are going to be early career audience, so they're not going to be too familiar with all aspects of civil engineering, but they obviously have an interest. A local residents group is a non-technical audience, so you have to tailor your communication style and language to suit that audience. And then you have people with a technical background without specialist knowledge in civil engineers, people in building control, architects, other engineers working in other disciplines. And then we come to students in your local secondary school. So again, another non-technical audience with age-relevant level of awareness and understanding. And then finally, you've got a local government representative, likely to be non-technical, but aware of the issues. So there are the response formats. So in summary, download the guidance, read it thoroughly, it's only a few pages, respond as an engaged civil engineer. There are 2 questions, answer 1, read the question carefully, understand what the reviewers are looking for, and be able to answer all the scenarios and response formats. It's no longer based on your experience. All scenarios, all formats are potential questions. And finally, the guidance finishes off by saying we would expect any candidate who can write clearly and who is familiar with current issues within the industry to be able to respond well. And if you're reading the New Civil Engineer on a regular basis, looking at the ICE website on a regular basis, picking up on the news items, news and insight blogs, you should be able to respond well. So I thought it'd be worth adding that, because an engaged engineer is not defined. So I thought I would put forward my interpretation of what an engaged engineer might look like. So I hope you found that of use. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kieran. That was really useful. I made a lot of notes there myself. So before, I know we're at 7:30 now, so I don't think we've got too much longer. But just before we go into kind of any wider Q&A, if anyone's got any questions, I just wanted to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank everyone. So Hitesh, Lizzie, Deryck, Marko and Kieran for helping us out this evening and giving up their time to hopefully help us pass our chartership in the future. I then just also wanted to plug some upcoming early careers events that we've got on the go. So starting on the 27th of April, We'll be running a 6-week geotechnical series. Working title is Desk Study to Design. So this will be 6 sessions held every other Wednesday evening. For those of you that have had maybe a couple of years experience doing one thing, say, on site or producing reports or designs, but you maybe haven't seen what else is going on in the sector, this is an ideal opportunity for a bit of CPD. So details on the venue and the modules in more detail will be available soon, but I wanted to let people know about those. It's also a bit off the press, but the Rankin dinner and lecture is still happening this year. So this is the annual sort of, the biggest geotechnical talk that we have, quite frankly, that the BGA does. So after Stephen Jeffrey's talk this year, hopefully the early careers will have an area in the H Bar in Imperial College London for some networking drinks. That's still being arranged at the moment, but I just wanted to flag the date of the 16th of March with people and sign up to be announced shortly. And then also, for those of you that might not be with us in London at the moment, things do happen outside of London. Also in March, the 23rd of March, at the University of Nottingham, we are joining the Federation of Piling Specialists Early Careers Group and University of Nottingham Centre for Geomechanics to hold an early careers seminar. So this will be a range of postdoctorate and postgrad presentations, and we've got some posters as well from current students, and we're also going to have some industry talks from I think four companies as well. So it's an afternoon session, so it does start at 2 o'clock, runs until about 6, and there is a sign up available on our webpage as well, and it's free to attend and would be a really good networking opportunity. We've got some offshore engineering companies and some piling organisations coming along as well, so that'll be really, really great. And then just a final plug from me, those of you who are studying at the moment, or even in your early career and you're looking for help advancing your career, the British Geotechnical Association has a fund award, so they can provide up to £1,000 for anything that will support or advance a geotechnical career. Applications are open all year round, but the board meets twice a year to sort of review applications to sort of divvy up some money. So the next deadline is in May. I do understand that sometimes if it is a bit more time critical, they might meet sooner, but we're really keen to make sure that this fund is available to as many people that would be beneficial from it as we can. So if anyone's got any ideas or thinks that they could have some funds to help with a study or a side project, research, whatever it is, we're happy to help get involved and see if we can put a good application together. But yeah, just wanted to kind of let people know about this one. So yeah, that's all from me. I'll leave this final slide up. We are always looking for new members, general members or specific committee members. We've got a big group in London now, which is great, but we're also doing things in the southwest of the UK and our generically named Northern Hub, which is very much everything outside of the M25 at the moment, which is not so good. But if you do want to join us or check out what we do, you can express interest on our webpage. Yep, so that's all for me. Thank you. I know that there's been some questions that have been answered in the chat, which is great. So if there were any final questions, we can raise hands and do a verbal Q&A, or I can do a close to the event. Okay, so there's 2 questions that have just popped up. So what's the most common attribute ground engineers struggle to demonstrate at review is the first one.
Depends. Well, technically they're very strong. I would say some of the commercial aspects. I think what I find is if you're part of a big company, a big organisation, you tend to focus on design for a chunk of time, then maybe move on to something else, and then maybe move on to something else. And I think that if you're technically focused, some of the PM side of things can be missed or be a bit light. So I would say make sure you get some decent commercial experience. That's probably the bit on that one. And do make sure you get out to site, go and see the stuff. I think generally just go out and see the site.
Great. Okay, and we'll do this final question from Max, and then we'll call it a close. So, periods during your career when sort of membership might have lapsed, would that count against you? I'd hope that it wouldn't. And
No,
if so,
well,
to what degree?
So you're the only people that see. So if you're part of a training agreement, the only people that see your training agreement is your DE, your SCE, and your MDO. So you know, in terms of getting signed off of that training agreement, that side of things, you know, talk to your DE, SCE, and your MDO, and then and do that. I've got someone on my team who's excellent. You know, he's a chartered engineer in everything but name, and you know, he's left it for a period. He's gone and had, you know, a family, and he's just gone in. He was in a training agreement, and basically the advice from the MDO is to go down a, you know, experience route, and so he's doing a sort of career appraisal and then doing that. So there are other ways of doing it. So no, all experience counts. You just got to find a way of recording it in the right way and then following through the process.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Hopefully that answers questions. Let's do a close to the event there then. Yeah. Thanks again for our reviewers and our reviewees that are now successfully chartered people. So that's great. And yeah, thanks for joining us today. And yeah, thank you very much.